All right. Thank you, Paul, and thank you all for being here. Welcome to the last session of the day. As Paul mentioned, my name is Neal Sharma. I lead WCN's California Wildlife Program, which is focused on conserving connectivity throughout California. In order to conserve connectivity, we're employing a variety of different approaches to protect and restore the conditions in the landscape that allow individual animals to find the resources they need to live their lives, that allow wildlife populations to remain viable and healthy, and that allow ecological relationships and processes to take place. These are all reasons why connectivity is crucial and why it's our focus here in California, especially given the nature and scale of habitat fragmentation that we're seeing here. As one of the major thematic areas of this work, we spent a lot of time assessing the negative impacts of highways and understanding how to address these, often through wildlife crossing infrastructure. So these measures that can reduce wildlife vehicle collisions, promote connectivity and safe passage for wildlife. And that's what we're really going to dig into today. And I'm thrilled to introduce a brand new wildlife crossing project in an area of statewide importance. We're just getting this off the ground, so this early days, but I thought what better time than Spring Expo to just give an early look to you all at this exciting new initiative. To set the stage, I want to start by asking, how many people here remember the wolf OR93? This is a wolf that was making the news a few years ago. Good show of hands, all right. So OR93 was a wolf that started out in Oregon and made this tremendous voyage, hundreds of miles south. I can't imagine what this wolf saw, the sights, the challenges. We know some of the challenges in that this wolf crossed multiple highways on this amazing voyage, hundreds of miles south. Made all that way close to Southern California, and then was found dead right off a section of I-5 near Southern California in the Tahachapis near the town of Lebec, with the signs pointing to a vehicle strike as the cause. Now, the story of OR93 is, as far as we can tell, quite an outlier. It's not indicative of broader patterns we're seeing with wolf dispersal in California necessarily. I think any way I look at it, it's just an amazing story. But one of the things that's interesting is that the wolf made it all this way and then was killed on this section of I-5, which has been known to conservation as an area that needs to be addressed. It's within a broader landscape that's known as an important area for conservation. And lately, there's a lot of urgency that's changing the way we look at this landscape that's really related to this animal right here, the puma, or mountain lion cougar, same species. And what we're seeing with many of the populations in California, especially central coastal and Southern California, is essentially isolated populations where they're not able to exchange genes, interbreed with their neighbors. We're starting to see the signs of inbreeding, which we know doesn't bode well for the viability of these important apex predators in their ecosystems. So this is a graphic that was derived from some recent demographic research on puma populations here in California. The different colors correspond to potential subpopulations. And this is the landscape right where that section of I-5 was. And we're going to take a closer look here in just a moment. One of the ways I think of this landscape is that it's essentially a linchpin of genetic connectivity. And what we really need to do is restore flow through this landscape, because this is the region where those imperiled coastal populations are connected to the abundant genetically diverse cats in the Sierra Nevada and beyond. So a really important landscape for that species. Throughout California, we have an extensive system of built infrastructure, linear infrastructure, especially the highway system. The graphic behind me is a capture from an interactive wildlife crossing inventory that was produced by our partners at the Wildlands Network. It was produced with grant support from WCN. The green icons represent completed wildlife crossings, yellow are in construction, and the red are in planning. And as this resource was being developed, one of the things we noticed is there didn't seem to be anything in place or even underway in this section of I-5. This is a view of that landscape. I'm going to refer to it shorthand as the Tahachapis. The Tahachapi Mountains are in here. It's part of the transverse ranges, so essentially a east-west mountain range, if you want to think of it that way. It's a range that connects the Sierra Nevada to the coast. It's been referred to as a crucible of evolution because it's situated at the confluence of 4 distinct ecoregions. Really fascinating area, important for biodiversity conservation overall, and we know there's a lot of urgency around connectivity in the area. Fortunately, this region is buttressed by some substantial protected areas, both existing now and planned in the future. It's a landscape that has a need for additional land protection, but what we're going to focus on today is really the highways, particularly Highway 58 and I-5. So 58 we have to the northeast, and then I-5 is that longer segment to the southwest. Highway 58 is a bit more promising, at least as of right now, because there's a great working group that's already in action, working on the highway right there. That's that straight shot sort of in the foreground. We're looking west into the Tahachapis. And by working group, what this really is a group of colleagues from agencies and NGOs who have gotten together, and we meet once a month or more to figure out what the issues are and how we can proceed with the interventions that are needed. So right now the focus is really on understanding the existing infrastructure, like this one that was built to drain water under the highway. But as you can see with our colleague there for scale, as well as the 18-wheeler going over top, this is a large structure, and it's used by multiple species in the area. So we're identifying these, figuring out how they're being used, and figuring out how they can be enhanced to double as more attractive and functional wildlife crossing features. And the group is also planning the design for 2 new dedicated wildlife crossing structures in this section of Highway 58. But we have to get back to the story of I-5. So that one started really jumping out on the radar when we were developing the wildlife crossing inventory. And so last year I reached out to a handful of colleagues, including some of our close colleagues at the Nature Conservancy and a group called SC Wildlands, a few others, and asked around, is anybody working on wildlife crossings on this section of I-5? And there was a resounding consensus that this is an important priority area to be addressed. It's been identified in multiple assessments, but there was no effort with any cohesion or momentum underway. It's just an idea. So late last year, we convened a meeting with some of the key stakeholders. The logos behind me represent the organizations where we had representatives who came to this initial meeting of what's now an I-5 working group that's focusing on wildlife crossings on a 45-mile section of I-5. So this is a tall order, it's a big scope of work, but it's an area of intense need. And the group's now rolling forward with the nuts and bolts. So I was out there a couple weeks ago when I took this image. I'm standing in the middle of I-5 on a large vegetated median between the southbound and northbound lanes, looking south here in the photo. This is in the northern part of the study area. But in a somewhat similar flavor to the work at Highway 58 and many other places where we're involved throughout California, we're down there by the side of the road, vehicles whizzing by, looking at the existing infrastructure, figuring out how it's being used, figuring out how it fits into a system of wildlife passage features that we're just starting to envision. We're also looking at areas where new structures are needed, where there's really nothing that's suitable that could be retrofitted or modified through some more modest enhancements. With a 45-mile section of highway, the assumption is we're going to need multiple new structures to be implemented here. So what we're working on is an action plan for a whole system of crossing structures. And we'll advance some of those all the way to the shovel-ready design and then construction. But these are early days. This is an initiative we're just getting off the ground now. So we were out there a couple weeks ago in a drainage along the side of the highway, and I looked down and saw this gorgeous tree frog, just right there by the side of I-5. And then we got a little ways away from the road and found fresh puma tracks, fresh black bear tracks, deer tracks. This is an area that's full of life, and these highways need attention to stitch the big picture of conservation together. One of the things that occurs to me is that we're really at the start of easily a decade-plus process. And I'm looking here at the Laurel Curve Wildlife Crossing on Highway 17 in Santa Cruz County, so really nearby. Recently completed that was a 10-year effort, essentially from start to finish. And we could meditate on whether that's too long, whether that makes sense given the scale and the complexity of these kinds of efforts. To me, the important thing is that we're starting now. There's great momentum, and we're able to learn a lot from successful projects, including the challenges that people have overcome nearby and further afield with other wildlife crossing projects. This is an era of implementation for these kinds of features, and it's really exciting to be in it after thinking about these things for years. Another beautiful thing is that we know that when these features are in place, they will perform. So this is the first puma using the crossing at Laurel Curve under Highway 17. Great work by the Land Trust of Santa Cruz County and many other organizations involved. We were able to help out in a minor way recently with the effectiveness monitoring. But it's great to see that these things work. It's just a heavy lift to get them from soup to nuts. One of the things we think about a lot through WCN's California Wildlife Program is how to advance efforts in parallel. Each of these projects is an immense lift, a decade at a time, involving many organizations, public-private partnerships. And we're in a situation where we're not bound by geographic working areas, jurisdictions, or anything like that, so we can tailor our role to help establish or support different partnerships and figure out how to advance a cohort of crossing projects in parallel. So there's so much to be done here. We spend a lot of time thinking about how we can get things moving at the same time. Another piece, in addition to the parallel efforts, is thinking about complementarity. So we've had this example of Laurel Curve at Highway 17, or the work at I-5 or Highway 58. These are essential place-based, on-the-ground interventions that need to be put in place. We're also working, and often with different partners, on policy solutions, often at a statewide scale. So while we're working with partners to remediate some of these on-the-ground issues, existing problems, we also need to be working on the systemic changes that are best addressed through policy. So working in parallel to advance progress and using complementary approaches are really what WCN's California Wildlife Program strategy looks like in action. So we can return to the topic of wolves in California, and at the time, OR 93 seemed like an outlier. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. It's an amazing story either way. And then there was last year when we learned that there was a new wolf pack found in Tulare County, not too far from Bakersfield. And if we think about where that wolf pack showed up, or better, was found, and then we think about the Tahachapis, Highway 58, I-5, those crossings that were in the early stages of planning and building right now, that's not very far in wolf miles. So it's not inconceivable that at some point in the future, the structures that we're putting in place now might need to be used by wolves. What we do know is there's an urgent need here and now to restore gene flow and connectivity through that landscape and throughout much of California for these imperiled puma populations. We know that these kinds of structures will benefit many species in the areas where they're put in place, and we know that they're a really essential tool in the toolkit to put into the landscape as a long-term way to support biodiversity overall and functional, resilient ecosystems. I'd like to invite you to come find me at the California Wildlife Program booth out there with the other conservationists. I'm always happy to talk shop and would be happy to continue the conversation there. Thank you all for being here.